The Galactic Union's Central Forum was a marvel of engineering and diplomacy, a glittering space station suspended in orbit around a massive blue giant star. It was an architectural masterpiece that symbolized the unity of hundreds of species spread across the galaxy. Delegates from distant worlds gathered in its vast halls to negotiate treaties, discuss trade routes, and maintain peace in a galaxy often teetering on the brink of chaos. For humanity, the newest member of the Union, the Central Forum was both an opportunity and a constant reminder of their perceived inadequacy. Earth had joined the Union barely a century ago, a blink in galactic time, and many species still regarded humans as upstarts. Physically unimpressive, technologically reliant, and lacking the psychic abilities or evolutionary advantages of other species, humans were easy to dismiss. Ambassador Samantha Hayes knew this better than anyone. As humanity's representative, she often faced derision from the more powerful species, particularly the Xelorans. The Xelorans, towering insectoid beings with gleaming exoskeletons and immense physical strength, were one of the Union's founding members. They prided themselves on their dominance, their warriors capable of bending steel with their bare hands. To them, humans were frail, insignificant creatures. Ambassador Vrexel of the Xeloran Empire was particularly vocal about his disdain for humans. At nearly 3 meters tall, with a carapace that shimmered like obsidian under the station's artificial lights, Vrexel embodied Xeloran pride. His mandibles clicked with amusement whenever he addressed Hayes, his deep, resonant voice dripping with condescension. "Tell me, Ambassador Hayes," Vrexel said during a heated debate in the Forum, his tone mocking. "What is it that your people contribute to the Union? Strength? No. Advanced technology? Certainly not. Perhaps your strength lies in your endless optimism." A ripple of laughter spread through the chamber, mostly from delegates who shared Vrexel's sentiments. Hayes kept her composure, though the insult stung. She straightened her posture, meeting Vrexel's gaze with calm resolve. "Ambassador Vrexel," she replied evenly, her voice steady but firm. "Humanity may lack the physical strength of the Xelorans or the psychic abilities of the Irini, but we've survived and thrived on a world that has thrown countless challenges at us. Our strength lies in our resilience, our adaptability, and our ability to work together. Underestimate us if you wish. But history has shown that those who do often regret it." Vrexel's mandibles twitched in what might have been amusement or irritation. "Resilience," he repeated, the word dripping with disdain. "A trait of those too weak to rely on anything else." The tension in the room was palpable. But before the debate could escalate further, the station's AI, Syra, interrupted with a high-priority alert. The forum's lights dimmed slightly as Syra's calm, authoritative voice filled the chamber. "Attention all delegates. A freighter in distress has sent an emergency signal. The vessel Starwind is under attack by Krellic raiders in the Moranis system. Rescue teams are en route, but additional assistance is required. All available personnel, please report to the nearest hangar bay." The announcement sent a wave of activity through the forum. Delegates who were also trained operatives or military personnel began leaving the chamber, hurrying to join the rescue effort. Hayes immediately stood, her expression resolute. "I'll assist," she said, heading for the exit. Vrexel's mandibles clicked in what sounded like a laugh. "You human, what can you possibly do against Krellic raiders? They'll crush you like a leaf." Hayes paused and turned to face him, her voice sharp. "This isn't about strength, Vrexel. It's about doing the right thing. Maybe you should try it sometime." Without waiting for a response, she strode out of the chamber. As she walked, her mind raced. The Krellics were notorious throughout the galaxy, a band of ruthless marauders who attacked vulnerable ships and colonies, stealing resources and enslaving survivors. Their brutality was matched only by their cunning, and even the mightiest species treated them with caution. Hayes arrived at the hangar bay, where rescue teams were boarding shuttles. The atmosphere was tense but efficient, with soldiers and medics from various species preparing for what promised to be a dangerous mission. Hayes spotted a team of Xeloran warriors, their imposing figures unmistakable, and among them was Vrexel. He caught her eye and shook his head, his expression a mix of incredulity and disdain. "Are you seriously going?" he asked as she approached. "Yes," Hayes replied simply, donning a standard-issue rescue suit. "I don't need your approval. You'll get yourself killed," Vrexel said, his tone dismissive. "Humans are not made for this kind of operation." Hayes adjusted her suit and picked up a plasma rifle. "Maybe not," she said, "but I'd rather die trying than stand by and do nothing." Before Vrexel could respond, the shuttle doors closed and the rescue teams launched into the void. The journey to the Star Wind was tense. Hayes sat among a diverse group of rescuers, their faces grim as they prepared for the battle ahead. The Xeloran warriors, clad in their heavy armor, were silent and focused. Hayes felt their skepticism, like a weight pressing down on her, but she pushed it aside. She wasn't here to prove anything to them. She was here to save lives. When the shuttle exited hyperspace, the scene was chaos. The freighter Starwind drifted in a debris field, its hull scarred and its engines offline. Krellic ships swarmed around it, firing sporadically and launching boarding pods. The rescue team's shuttles broke formation, each heading for a different part of the freighter to secure entry points. Hayes and her team, which included Vrexel and his guards, breached an airlock on the freighter's port side. The moment they stepped inside, the chaos intensified. Fires burned in the corridors, the air thick with smoke and the acrid smell of scorched metal. The sounds of distant gunfire and screams echoed through the ship. "Stay close," Vrexel ordered his guards, ignoring Hayes entirely. The team moved quickly, scanning for survivors and fending off Krellic raiders when they encountered them. The raiders were tall, wiry beings with sharp claws and predatory eyes. They moved with a feral grace, their weapons crude but effective. Hayes focused on her role, providing cover fire and helping injured crew members they encountered. Her heart pounded in her chest, but she forced herself to stay calm. The mission wasn't about fear. It was about action. As they moved deeper into the ship, a low, pained roar echoed through the corridors. Turning a corner, the team came upon a harrowing sight. A massive Xeloran crew member trapped beneath a collapsed bulkhead. The alien's exoskeleton was cracked in places, and his breathing was labored. "Help me," the Xeloran gasped, his voice weak but desperate. "Please." Hayes moved toward him immediately, but Vrexel raised a clawed hand to stop her. "This is futile," he said. "Even I cannot lift that. He's as good as dead." Hayes glared at him. "He's one of yours, and you're just going to leave him." "There's no time," Vrexel snapped. "We have to move." Hayes ignored him. She knelt beside the injured Xeloran, assessing the situation. The bulkhead was enormous, far heavier than anything she had ever attempted to lift, but she couldn't leave him, not when there was even a chance she could help. "Hold on," she said to the injured Xeloran. "I'll get you out." Vrexel watched, his mandibles twitching in disbelief. "What are you doing, human? You'll never." "Shut up and help, or get out of the way," Hayes shot back, her voice fierce. And then, against all odds, she began to lift. Ambassador Samantha Hayes knew it was madness, but she also knew she didn't have a choice. The injured Xeloran crew member was pinned beneath a bulkhead that looked like it weighed more than a small vehicle. His breathing was shallow, and his carapace was fractured along his abdomen and legs. Every second that passed brought him closer to death, whether from the pressure crushing his lower body or the spreading fire inching closer in the smoke-filled corridor. "Hold on," Hayes said again, though the words sounded hollow in the chaos. She planted her boots firmly against the scorched deck, braced her hands on the edge of the bulkhead, and began to pull. At first, nothing happened. The metal didn't budge, not even an inch. Hayes gritted her teeth, the muscles in her arms and legs straining as she poured every ounce of effort into the task. Sweat dripped down her face, mixing with the soot smeared across her skin. Her breath came in ragged gasps, but she refused to stop. "Human, you're wasting your energy," Ambassador Vrexel said, his tone cold. He stood a few paces away, watching the scene with what seemed like morbid curiosity. You cannot hope to lift that. Even I would struggle to move it, and I am Xeloran. Hayes didn't respond. She couldn't spare the energy to argue. Her focus was singular, saving the life in front of her. Her heart pounded in her chest as adrenaline coursed through her veins. Her muscles burned, screaming for her to stop, but she pushed past the pain. This wasn't just about proving Vrexel wrong. It wasn't even about defending humanity's reputation in the Galactic Union. It was about doing what was right. A sharp, metallic groan filled the air as the bulkhead shifted ever so slightly. It wasn't much, but it was enough to give Hayes hope. The Xeloran beneath it, his 4 yellow eyes wide with disbelief, struggled to lift his upper body and crawl forward. You're actually moving it, the injured Xeloran gasped, his voice weak but laced with awe. Hayes ignored the growing tremor in her arms and the sharp pain radiating through her back. Her mind was a whirl of determination and desperation. She thought of the countless humans throughout history who had performed impossible feats in moments of crisis. Parents lifting cars to save their children, soldiers carrying wounded comrades through battlefields. Humanity had always found strength in adversity, and Hayes was no exception. "Don't stop," the Xeloran pleaded, his voice breaking. "Just a little more." Hayes dug her boots into the floor, letting out a primal scream as she shifted her weight and pushed harder. The bulkhead lifted higher, just enough for the Xeloran to drag himself out. His legs were mangled, and his carapace was cracked in multiple places, but he was free. As soon as the Xeloran was clear, Hayes' strength gave out. The bulkhead crashed back down, sending a deafening clang reverberating through the corridor. Hayes collapsed to her knees, gasping for air. Her arms felt like lead, and every muscle in her body screamed in agony. But she had done it. The Xeloran crew member, trembling and bloodied, looked up at her with an expression of pure gratitude. You saved me," he said, his voice barely audible over the crackle of the nearby fire. Hayes gave him a weak smile. "Just doing my job." Vrexel, who had remained silent during the entire ordeal, finally stepped forward. His mandibles clicked in what seemed like disbelief, and his multifaceted eyes flicked between Hayes and the rescued Xeloran. For a long moment he said nothing, as though struggling to process what he had just witnessed. "That was impossible," Vrexel said at last, his voice uncharacteristically subdued. "No human should be able to." "Save the commentary," Hayes interrupted, her voice hoarse but firm. "We need to get him to the shuttle." She forced herself to her feet, biting back a groan of pain as her body protested. She leaned down and helped the injured Xeloran to stand, letting him lean heavily on her shoulder. He was enormous, even by Xeloran standards, and twice her size. Each step was a struggle, but Hayes didn't falter. "Come on," she said, nodding toward Vrexel and his guards. "Let's move before this whole section goes up in flames." Vrexel hesitated, but then he barked an order to his guards, who formed a protective perimeter around Hayes and the injured Xeloran. They moved quickly through the ship's damaged corridors, dodging pockets of fire and skirmishes with Krellic raiders. Hayes' every step was accompanied by searing pain in her legs, but she didn't stop. The Xeloran crew member leaned heavily on her, his weight almost unbearable, but she kept moving. As they neared the airlock where their shuttle was docked, a group of Krellic raiders appeared, blocking their path. The raiders were lean and wiry, with jagged weapons and predatory grins. They hissed and charged, their movements swift and chaotic. Vrexel stepped forward, his massive frame towering over the raiders. With a roar, he lashed out with his claws, slicing through the nearest attacker with ease. His guards joined the fray, their plasma rifles blazing. Hayes kept her grip on the injured Xeloran, using her free hand to fire her own rifle whenever a raider got too close. The battle was brief but brutal. When the last raider fell, the group didn't hesitate. They hurried through the airlock and onto the shuttle, the hatch sealing behind them just as an explosion rocked the freighter. Inside the shuttle, medics rushed to the injured Xeloran, stabilizing him and preparing him for transport to the Central Forum's medical wing. Hayes sank into a seat, her body completely spent. Every muscle throbbed, and her vision swam, but she felt a deep sense of satisfaction. She had done what she had set out to do. Vrexel stood near the shuttle's viewport, staring out at the freighter as it disappeared into the void. After a long moment, he turned to Hayes. His mandibles twitched, and his tone was uncharacteristically subdued when he spoke. "Ambassador Hayes," he said, his voice lacking its usual condescension. "I misjudged you." Hayes raised an eyebrow, too exhausted to muster much of a response. "Is that your way of saying thank you?" Vrexel's mandibles clicked again, and he inclined his head slightly, a gesture that might have been the Xeloran equivalent of a nod. "You saved one of my people, despite the odds, despite your limitations. That is commendable." Hayes gave him a faint smile. "Humans aren't as weak as you think, Vrexel. Maybe one day you'll see that." As the shuttle sped away from the freighter, Hayes leaned back in her seat, her body aching but her spirit unbroken. She knew the mission wasn't over. There were still survivors to account for, and the fight against the Krelliks was far from finished. But for now, she allowed herself a moment of quiet satisfaction. In the silence of the shuttle, she could feel the weight of what she had accomplished. Not just lifting the bulkhead, but proving, if only for a moment, that humanity's strength went far beyond the physical. The shuttle docked at the Central Forum's medical bay, its hull still scorched from the rescue mission. Medics and engineers waited anxiously as the hatch opened, revealing the rescue team and their battered passengers. Samantha Hayes, bruised and barely able to stand, helped guide the injured Xeloran crew member down the ramp. His immense frame still leaned on her heavily, but he was alive thanks to her relentless effort. "Get him stabilized," Hayes called to the medics, her voice hoarse but commanding. Two Xeloran medical personnel rushed forward, gently transferring their injured crewmate onto a stretcher. The Xeloran, now conscious and lucid, locked eyes with Hayes. "Thank you," he murmured, his voice thick with pain but genuine gratitude. "You didn't have to save me, but you did. I won't forget this." Hayes nodded, exhaustion tugging at her every fiber. "Rest now. You're going to be fine." As the medics carried him away, Hayes turned to find Ambassador Vrexel standing a few steps away, his multifaceted eyes fixed on her. He was uncharacteristically silent, his mandibles clicking softly in what seemed to be thought rather than mockery. "Ambassador Hayes," Vrexel began, his deep voice slower than usual, as if he were carefully choosing his words. "I still cannot fully comprehend what I witnessed back there." Hayes raised an eyebrow. "What part? The rescue, or the fact that I managed to lift something you said was impossible?" "Both," Vrexel admitted, his tone lacking the usual derision. "It defies logic. Your physiology is not designed for such feats. Even with adrenaline, the act you performed, it should have killed you." Hayes crossed her arms, ignoring the lingering ache in her shoulders. "Humans have a tendency to push beyond what's expected of us when lives are on the line. We're not always the strongest or the fastest, but we have heart. That's what matters." Vrexel's mandibles twitched, but he didn't argue. Instead, he regarded her with a strange expression, something between respect and confusion. Before he could respond, a high-pitched chime echoed through the medical bay. The station's AI, Syra, spoke through the comms. "Ambassadors Hayes and Vrexel, your presence is requested in the Central Forum. An emergency debriefing regarding the Krellik attack is commencing." Hayes sighed. She barely had the energy to stand, but duty called. "Guess there's no rest for the weary," she muttered. The Central Forum was alive with activity when they arrived. Delegates from across the galaxy crowded into the vast chamber, their voices overlapping in a chaotic cacophony. The Krellik attack on the Starwind had sent shockwaves through the Union, and everyone wanted answers. As Hayes and Vrexel entered, the room quieted slightly, the delegates' attention shifting to them. Whispers rippled through the chamber. Rumors of Hayes' actions had already begun to spread. Is it true? A delegate from the aquatic Xelari species asked, their translucent forms shimmering in the light. The human lifted a bulkhead to save a Xeloran. I heard she fought off a dozen Krelliks single-handedly. Another delegate chimed in, their feathery appendages fluttering with excitement. Hayes suppressed a groan. The story was already spiraling into exaggerated legend, but she didn't have the energy to correct them. She approached the central podium, where the Union's chairperson, a venerable Urini elder named Talis Ryyh, waited. Ambassador Hayes, Talis began, her voice calm but commanding. We have heard reports of your actions during the rescue mission. It seems you played a pivotal role in saving lives aboard the Starwind. Would you care to elaborate? Hayes glanced around the room, aware of the hundreds of eyes on her. She could feel the weight of their skepticism, their curiosity, and their judgment. Taking a deep breath, she stepped forward. It's true that I helped rescue one of the Xeloran crew members, Hayes began, her voice steady despite her fatigue. He was trapped under a bulkhead, and there wasn't time to wait for reinforcements. I did what I had to do, and you managed to lift the bulkhead on your own? Talis asked, her expression inscrutable. Yes, Hayes replied simply. It wasn't easy, and it wasn't something I ever expected to do. But in that moment, strength didn't matter as much as determination. A murmur spread through the chamber. Some delegates seemed impressed, others doubtful. Vrexel stepped forward, his towering presence commanding attention. I can confirm her account, he said, his deep voice cutting through the noise. I was there. I witnessed it with my own eyes. Ambassador Hayes accomplished something extraordinary, something that should have been impossible for a human. The room fell silent, the weight of Vrexel's words settling over the delegates. For the first time in living memory, the Xeloran ambassador had spoken not with disdain, but with respect for a human. Talis tilted her head, her luminous eyes studying Hayes. This incident raises a broader question, she said thoughtfully. Perhaps we have underestimated humanity's potential. Ambassador Hayes, what do you believe this means for your people's place in the Union? Hayes hesitated. She wasn't one for grand speeches, but this was her chance to say something meaningful. Steeling herself, she addressed the room. Humans have always been seen as the weakest members of the Union, she began. We're not the strongest, the fastest, or the most advanced. But what we lack in raw power, we make up for in resilience, adaptability, and heart. We don't give up, even when the odds are against us. That's what makes us strong. She looked around the room, meeting the gazes of the delegates. This galaxy is full of incredible species, each with their own strengths and abilities. But strength isn't just about muscles or weapons. It's about courage, compassion, and the willingness to stand up for what's right, even when it's hard. That's what humanity brings to the Union. For a moment, there was silence. Then, one by one, delegates began to clap, their applause growing louder and more enthusiastic. Even Vrexel joined in, his mandibles clicking in what seemed to be approval. Talis raised a hand to quiet the room. Ambassador Hayes, your actions have reminded us of a truth we sometimes forget. Strength comes in many forms. Let this be a lesson to us all. As the session adjourned, delegates approached Hayes to congratulate her, their previous skepticism replaced with newfound respect. Hayes, still exhausted, accepted their praise with a mixture of gratitude and relief. Vrexel lingered behind as the crowd dispersed. He approached Hayes, his towering form casting a shadow over her. For a moment he said nothing, his mandibles twitching as though struggling with unfamiliar words. Ambassador Hayes, he said at last, his tone measured. I was wrong about you, about humanity. You've earned my respect. Hayes looked up at him, her expression unreadable. Thank you, Vrexel. But respect isn't given, it's earned. Maybe now you'll give my people a fair chance. Vrexel inclined his head. Perhaps I will. As Hayes watched him leave, she allowed herself a small smile. The road ahead was still long, and humanity's place in the galaxy was far from secure. But for the first time, she felt that they were truly beginning to be seen, not as weak but as equals. And in the vastness of the galaxy, that was the first step towards something greater. The aftermath of the rescue mission reverberated throughout the Galactic Union for weeks. News of Ambassador Samantha Hayes' impossible feat had spread beyond the Central Forum, carried on the lips of every delegate, through every comm network, and into the hearts of countless civilizations. Skepticism remained in some quarters. Humans had long been dismissed as fragile and insignificant in the vast cosmic order, but her actions had ignited something far greater: curiosity. Samantha Hayes, however, had little time to bask in the Union's newfound intrigue about humanity. The Krellic raiders had been emboldened by their recent attack, and their activities were intensifying along trade routes and colony borders. The Union Council convened a special session to address the growing threat, inviting Hayes to represent humanity as one of the lead strategists in the forthcoming response. Her presence in the council chambers felt different this time. The murmurs and sideways glances that had followed her during past sessions were quieter now, replaced with subtle nods of acknowledgement or even respect. Hayes could feel the shift, but she refused to let it distract her. Humanity's position in the galaxy wasn't secured by one act of heroism, and the Union still saw humans as newcomers in need of proving their worth. She leaned over the holographic table in the war room, where star maps and fleet movements shimmered in pale blue light. Beside her stood a coalition of military strategists, including Vrexel, whose demeanor toward her had softened since the rescue. While he remained as stoic and blunt as ever, there was an unspoken understanding between them now, a grudging respect built on shared survival. "The Krellics are exploiting the weakest sectors," Hayes said, pointing to a cluster of trade routes near the unclaimed neutral expanse. "They're hitting supply chains and civilian transport vessels, forcing Union fleets to stretch thin just to keep up. They want us scattered and vulnerable." Vrexel studied the map with his 4 glowing eyes, his mandibles clicking softly. "And what do you propose, Ambassador Hayes? Surely you don't think we can cover every vulnerable system simultaneously?" "Not directly," Hayes replied, her voice calm but firm. "We can't outflank the Krellics with sheer numbers, but we can outsmart them. Their raids are predictable. They hit where they think resistance is weakest. What if we turn their tactics against them?" A murmured ripple of intrigue spread among the other strategists. Vrexel tilted his head, his mandibles twitching. "You suggest baiting them into a trap." "Exactly." Hayes tapped a few commands into the console, highlighting a lightly populated sector at the edge of Union space. "Here, we stage a convoy with valuable cargo, but conceal a heavily armed strike force within the fleet. When the Krellics move in for an easy raid, we hit them hard. It sends a message. Union space is no longer theirs to exploit." Vrexel considered her plan, the glow of the holographic table reflecting in his multifaceted eyes. Finally, he gave a slow nod. "It is unorthodox, but it may work. Your people are known for unpredictability. Perhaps this is where that trait proves useful." The others murmured their agreement, and within hours, preparations for the operation were underway. Hayes felt a flicker of satisfaction. Her plan wasn't just accepted, it was trusted. 2 weeks later, the bait convoy floated through the Zethras corridor, a narrow passage lined with unstable asteroid fields. On the surface, it appeared to be an ordinary trade fleet, its cargo holds filled with energy crystals and medical supplies. But hidden within the unassuming ships were squadrons of elite Union soldiers, advanced weaponry, and stealth detection systems. Samantha Hayes stood aboard the command deck of the lead ship, watching the tactical displays with sharp focus. Vrexel was at her side, his towering form as immovable as ever. "You seem confident," Vrexel observed, his tone neutral but edged with curiosity. "I have to be," Hayes replied, her gaze never leaving the display. "If I doubt this plan, so will everyone else. Besides, confidence isn't about knowing it'll work. It's about knowing you'll adapt if it doesn't." Vrexel made a soft clicking sound, which Hayes had come to recognize as a gesture of grudging approval. The waiting was excruciating. The crew operated in tense silence, scanning for any sign of the enemy. Hayes's pulse quickened as the minutes stretched into hours. But then, as if on cue, alarms blared across the deck. Krellic vessels inbound, a technician called out. 3 ships, coming in fast from the port quadrant. Hayes straightened, her instincts kicking in. Steady. Let them make the first move. The Krellic ships descended like vultures, their jagged designs cutting through the void. As expected, they targeted the lead freighter, aiming to disable it and board for plunder. Now! Hayes ordered. The trap was sprung. Hidden weapon systems activated, and the convoy ships unleashed a devastating barrage of plasma fire. The Krellics, caught off guard, scrambled to regroup, but the Union forces were relentless. From within the freighters, strike teams launched in sleek fighters, swarming the enemy vessels with precision. Vrexel watched the chaos unfold, his mandibles clicking in what might have been approval. Your plan is effective, Hayes. The Krellics were not prepared for such resistance. That's the idea, Hayes said, her voice calm but edged with determination. Let's finish this. The battle was short but decisive. 1 Krellic ship was destroyed outright, while the other 2 were disabled and forced to retreat. Union forces suffered minimal damage, and the convoy remained intact. As the dust settled, cheers erupted across the command deck. Hayes allowed herself a small smile, relief washing over her. Vrexel turned to her, his towering form imposing even in the glow of victory. You have proven your worth, Ambassador Hayes. Not just in strength, but in strategy. Perhaps humans are more formidable than we gave you credit for. Hayes met his gaze, her expression resolute. We're not here to prove we're better than anyone else. We just want to stand as equals. For the first time, Vrexel extended one of his clawed hands, a gesture of respect in Xeloran culture. Hayes took it without hesitation, their handshake a silent agreement. In the weeks that followed, the victory at Zethra's corridor sent ripples through the Galactic Union. The Krellics, humiliated by their defeat, withdrew to the edges of unclaimed space, their raids temporarily halted. Meanwhile, the Union Council took notice of humanity's contributions, and Hayes found herself invited to more strategic discussions than ever before. But for Hayes, the victory wasn't just about military success. It was about changing perceptions. The Xeloran crew member she had saved recovered fully and publicly acknowledged her bravery, earning her the gratitude of his people. Delegates who once dismissed her began to seek her counsel, and the whispers of doubt were replaced with murmurs of respect. One evening, as Hayes walked the quiet halls of the Central Forum, she found herself reflecting on how far humanity had come. They were still new to the galaxy, still fighting for their place among giants. But now, they had proven that strength wasn't just about size or power. It was about heart, determination, and the courage to face impossible odds. And in that moment, she knew that humanity's future among the stars was brighter than ever. Months had passed since the victory at Zethra's corridor, and the Union had cautiously embraced a newfound respect for humanity. Samantha Hayes had been at the heart of it, not only proving her worth, but becoming a symbol of human resilience and adaptability. However, peace was fragile in the galaxy, and the echoes of Krellic aggression had only grown louder, more calculated. What had once been small, disorganized raids had now escalated into a full-fledged offensive against Union colonies. The fragile alliances were beginning to fray under the strain of the Krellic threat, and the stakes were higher than ever. Samantha stood on the observation deck of the Unity, the flagship of the Union fleet, her eyes fixed on the stars stretching out before her. The galaxy, so vast and filled with untold wonders, now felt suffocating. It was as if the weight of her new responsibilities had become too much to bear. Ambassador Hayes, a voice called out behind her. We have the latest intel. Hayes turned to see Talis RyYth, the Urini chairperson of the Union Council, stepping into the room. Her alien form, ageless and composed, seemed to carry the quiet authority that came with years of diplomatic experience. What's the situation? Hayes asked, her tone sharp. The Krelliks have established a forward base on the edge of the belt of Neve-Core, an unclaimed region. We've detected increased movements, ships, weapons, reinforcements. They're preparing for something bigger. Our intelligence suggests they're planning a strike on the Urini homeworld. Hayes's blood ran cold at the mention of the Urini homeworld. If the Krelliks succeeded in such an assault, it would be a devastating blow to the Union. The Urini were not only important allies, but a species capable of great knowledge and insight. Their fall would have severe consequences, both politically and militarily. Then it's time we act first, Hayes said, turning her gaze back to the stars. We can't afford to wait for them to make the first move. Talus's expression tightened. I was hoping you'd say that, but we need a strategy. We can't just send in a strike force blindly. We need a plan that ensures we don't lose everything in a single move. Hayes nodded, already thinking through the variables. The Krelliks were known for their brutality, but they were also cunning, always unpredictable in their attacks. A direct confrontation with their main fleet would be a risky gamble, but anything less would signal weakness. She couldn't afford to hesitate, not when the entire Union was at risk. I'll gather the commanders, Hayes said. We'll need a tactical strike with precision, a show of force to destabilize them before they can solidify their position. The war room was a hive of activity. Holographic projections of the Krellik fleet and their movements hovered over the table as military commanders from various Union species briefed Hayes on the situation. We have only one shot at this. General Kale from the Variks, a war-hardened species known for their battle tactics, said, tapping his claws against the map. A full assault on their forward base, while simultaneously hitting supply routes leading to their reinforcements. If we're quick, we can cripple them before they reach the Urini homeworld. You're sure we have enough firepower to match their fleet? Hayes asked, looking from one strategist to the next. We have the numbers, Vrexel answered, stepping forward. But the Krelliks are not known for their predictable tactics. We must be ready for counterattacks. There's no time for hesitation, Hayes said. We'll hit them hard and fast. This is our one opportunity to cut the Krelliks off at the knees before they can threaten the Urini homeworld. The commanders nodded in agreement, and soon the final details were set. The plan was dangerous, and every participant knew that failure would mean catastrophe. As Hayes stood to leave the war room, she felt a sense of weight upon her, a feeling that she couldn't shake, the responsibility of what lay ahead pressed down on her, and she realized just how high the stakes had become. Are you sure about this? Vrexel asked, his voice softer than usual. This kind of strike could cost us dearly. I'm sure, Hayes replied, turning to meet his gaze. We can't afford to play it safe anymore. If we wait for the Krelliks to come to us, we risk everything. Vrexel was silent for a moment before responding. Then I will stand by you, Ambassador Hayes. But you should know, not all of our allies are as certain about this as you are. I'm not asking for certainty. I'm asking for action, she said firmly. We can't afford to hesitate. The operation was launched under the cover of darkness, with the Union fleet slipping into the belt of Neve-Core undetected. As they neared the Krellik base, tensions were high. The entire fleet was on edge, their sensors scanning for any sign of the enemy. The first strike went flawlessly. A wave of ion bursts disabled the Krellik's communications and outer defenses. But the moment the Union forces moved in, the Krelliks retaliated. Their ships, cloaked and hidden in the asteroid fields, emerged in a flurry of weapons fire. The battle that ensued was chaotic and brutal. The Krelliks, though outnumbered, fought with desperation. Their ships were faster, more maneuverable, and more unpredictable than the Union fleet had anticipated. They launched hit-and-run attacks, forcing the Union ships into tight formations that limited their effectiveness. Hayes watched the battle unfold on the holographic display, her heart racing as Krellik forces struck against the Union's flanks. The strike force was in disarray. The plan had not accounted for the full scale of the Krellik retaliation. Reinforcements are delayed, a technician called out. We're losing ground. In that moment, Hayes knew they had to adapt. She keyed in a command, redirecting the fleet's firepower toward the Krellic command ship, hoping to take out their leadership and disrupt their coordination. But as the fire poured toward the ship, a massive explosion erupted in the distance. A new threat had arrived. More Krellic ships, large, heavily armored, emerged from behind a nearby asteroid. The trap had been set, and now the Union fleet was surrounded. Hayes's heart sank. They had underestimated the enemy's reach. "Prepare to break formation," Hayes barked, her voice calm despite the growing chaos. "We fight our way out." But the fight was slipping out of their hands. The Krellics pressed in from all sides, and Union ships began to fall. Hayes's eyes scanned the battlefield, her mind racing for a solution. Just as all hope seemed lost, a sharp voice came through the comms. "Ambassador Hayes, this is General Kale. We've found a weak spot in their defenses. If we can make a push through their right flank, we can destabilize their entire formation." Hayes hesitated for only a moment. Do it? The Union fleet rallied, pushing forward through the chaos. But it was clear, this battle would be their toughest yet. The tide of the battle continued to shift, and Samantha Hayes found herself standing at a precipice. The Krellics were proving to be far more formidable than anyone had expected. She had played her hand, but now she had to trust in the Union's strength to see them through. But one thing was certain. The fight for the future of the galaxy was only just beginning, and no matter what the cost, she would see it through.